G'day guys, and today we're going to talk about some bullshit coming out of the United States. So two of my Australian fellow alternative media commentators, Avi Yemini and Sydney Watson, have actually been stopped at the US border whilst they attempted to go over there, and Avi was actually deported. So the reason behind this was Avi was invited to speak on Comedy Central with Jim Jeffries, and what essentially happened is they did an interview and it was chopped up and edited in such a way to make Avi out to be a sort of anti-black, Islamophobic and that sort of thing. Thankfully, the bloke, smart bloke, had the idea to sort of set his phone down in the studio, the place where they were recording, and he recorded the whole thing, and he's got the whole clip, the whole interview completely unedited to hand, and he's been releasing that piecemeal, and I highly recommend you check that out, because you can compare it with what was shown in the Comedy Central interview, this Jim Jeffries show, and the actual raw footage, and it's completely dichotomous. The reality that was presented to the world by Comedy Central is simply not true. You can watch them side by side and see where they've taken answers from other sections of the interview and inserted them elsewhere. And when they've taken shots of Avi's face, his reactions looking disgusted and stuff like that, and slotted them in when Jeffries was posing him a question. I highly recommend you check this interview out. So that's the scene. Literal fake news, fake reality presented to the public. Avi calls out Jim Jeffries on this, and they attempt to go to the United States to go speak with other alternative media creators, such as Steven Crowder and Dave Rubin, appearing on the Rubin Report and that sort of thing. And essentially what has happened is Comedy Central has tipped off the FBI that Avi and Sydney are coming over and that they might be dangerous and violent. So we can see from her social media that she was questioned about their plans, where we were going, what we were doing, if they intended to get firearms or weapons, or if they planned to be violent. They also asked about Jim Jeffries and Comedy Central. And this is just the reality we live in, folks. Law-abiding, reasonable citizens are sort of thrown in a cell to sweat for hours and detained by border agents and endlessly questioned. Remember Lauren Southern trying to get into the UK, Milo Yiannopoulos trying to get into Australia, and you have to sit these people down who have never done anything violent or incited violence in any capacity, and you have to sit them down and ask them if they intend to be violent and attack people, whilst people like Jim Jeffries and Comedy Central go around defaming people with literally zero repercussions. Now you and I, or anyone else, can make a million videos, a million social media posts talking about how Comedy Central lied, how Jim Jeffries is an arse, a total hypocrite. Watch the raw footage and he goes around saying he doesn't like Islam, he draws the Prophet Muhammad, he makes a joke about a dingo not wanting to eat a baby Muslim because it'd be too gross or something. He's a total fucking hypocrite in private, and he goes around defaming Avi, and sure, we can ridicule him for that, but he's not going to get in legal trouble, because he's part of the establishment. He's establishment media, so what's going to happen here, and this is why you probably haven't heard about this, except if you follow Avi or Sydney, or if you chanced upon the story as I did, is that the entire establishment media is going to close ranks, and they're not going to talk about it. There's just going to be complete radio silence. It's up to us to hold people like this accountable, because this is what happens when you have a semi-monopoly over reality, essentially. This is what these media companies have. They have this vast quantities of ink in which they want to paint the world, and if anything doesn't correlate, or if they're exposed as liars and famous as they are, they can just close rank and refuse to talk about it. So it's up to us to expose the lies, to expose the hypocrisy, and deliver objective truth to the world. And the objective truth of this situation is that Avi was lied about. He was completely defamed. And following on from that, him and Sydney, completely law-abiding citizens who have done nothing wrong, were detained and interrogated by the FBI like they were planning a terrorist attack, merely based on the whims of Comedy Central tipping them off. And this is so fucked up because we have this establishment media groups talking about how, the internet's full of hate speech, and, Avi's Facebook page was taken down for hate speech, I believe. Stuff like that. We got to censor the internet. Certain people should not be allowed to speak their ideas and that sort of thing. These are the people, the very same people who would lie and defame about people and speak in private how they would, never present themselves to the public. These are the people that want to have a monopoly over your reality. Because that's what essentially would occur if people like me or you and I, Sydney and Watson, banned off the internet, if we're not allowed to speak, then the only way people can get information is through, quote, trusted and verifiable sources such as Comedy Central, and you're going to get this entirely warped view of reality that simply is not true. Protecting free speech online has got to be one of the most important battles of our generation. Something which, unfortunately, the executive branch in the States, Donald Trump, has not been very vocal on, and it's something he should absolutely focus on, because the freedom of speech surrounding the 2016 election, people making memes, people making arguments, people spreading the WikiLeaks releases, was part of the reason he was elected. In part, Donald Trump was elected due to the alternative media fighting back against the lies and propaganda. And it sucks to say it, but we haven't really received much in return for that sort of thing. You'll get Ted Cruz up there rambling about, or speaking about, how conservatives are censored online. It's not just conservatives, it's anyone who's not an establishmentarian. Heaven forbid regular little people like you and I can go around talking about politics. That's far too edgy. It's too much for the soccer mums of the world who just want everything to be sanitized and clean and nice and fluffy and ultimately boring and stale and full of lies and propaganda. That is what they do not realize. This sort of trading of freedom for security will not bring about either. All you're going to do is secure yourself into an endless future of dystopic lies. So an absolutely despicable event, coming from the supposed land of the free. It's one thing when you've got a nation like Britain or Australia, which has no constitution protecting, the rights of the individual. It's one thing for them to be dystopic and draconian and fuck people up and not let people come into the country. Because, Australians do not have the right to free speech, and neither do British people. But it's another thing entirely when you have a constitution, when you have a First Amendment in the United States, and it's routinely trodden on just because establishment groups tip you off, essentially. And that just shows the preferential treatment. I mean, if Avi or Sydney, if they tipped off the FBI about the Comedy Central, if they said something like, wow, I'm really worried when we come here, these guys are going to be violent against us, or they're going to, propagandize about us and get other people to come attack us, do you really think anything would have happened? No, of course not. So it's total bullshit, lies, and slander. I highly recommend everyone check out the unedited interview. It'd be really funny if someone got Jim Jeffries' sort of private viewpoints and juxtaposed them with his public viewpoints and had the two debating each other and had basically calling himself an Islamophobe. Because, he's the type of person who would come out and, frame Avi as being Islamophobic, even though he's joking about a dingo not wanting to eat a Muslim child and drawing the Prophet Muhammad and that sort of thing. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.